Choyo sampo pa gyo trashi pa tuche tempe trinle yarngo da pelge drolor zampe zeparche palden alame shabla solvade Om Guru Vajradhara Sumati Munisha Sanekar Uta Varda Nishri Bhadra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Hum Om Guru Vajradhara Sumati Munisha Uta Varda Nishri Bhadra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Hum Om Guru Vajradhara Sumati Munishasan Uta Varda Nishri Bhadra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Hum Om Guru Vajradhara Sumati Munishasanekar Uta Varda Nishri Bhadra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Hum Om Guru Vajradhara Sumati Munisha Sanekar Uta Varda Nishri Bhadra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Hum Om Guru Vajradhara Sumati Munisha Sanekar Uta Varda Nishri Bhadra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Hum Om Guru Vajradhara Sumati Munish Uta Varda Nishri Bhadra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Hum Om Guru Vajradhara Sumati Munisha Sanekar Uta Varda Nishri Bhadra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Hum Om Guru Vajradhara Sumati Munisha Sane Uta Varda Nishri Bhadra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Hum Om Guru Vajradhara Sumati Munisha Sanekar Uta Varda Nishri Bhadra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Hum Pakyuke Kodan Dagi Lu Pakyuke Sundan Dagi Nga Pakyuke Tudan Dagi Yi Tön Yerme Chiktu Chingi Lu Makyuke Kodan Dagi Lu Makyuke Sundan Dagi Nga Makyuke Tudan Dagi Yi Tön Yerme Chiktu Chingi Lo Om Muni Muni Maha Shakya Munye Swaha Om Muni Muni Maha Muni Shakya Munye Swaha Om Muni Muni Maha Muni Shakya Munye Swaha Sashipkim Choshiameto Chamare Ravalingashi Nidegem Padi Sangye chedan tsoge chonam la chancho pardo dani kyapsu chi dagi jinso gibe sonam ki drola pinchra sangye drupar sho sangye chedan tsoge chonam la chancho pardo dani kyapsu chi dagi jinso gibe sonam ki drola pinchra sangye drupar sho sangye chedan sogi chonam la chancho pardo dani kyapsu chi dagi jinso gibe sonam ki drola pinchra sangye drupar sho.
In the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, I take refuge until enlightenment. With the practice of generosity and the other perfections, may I obtain Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings. Good morning. I think that many of us, we've already found ourselves in the situation where we've said, oh, I've understood. But then after, that wasn't worth much. In the sense that, can you hear me well? Okay. In the sense that in our mind we have different levels. And there are different terms that are based on psychology and in different areas of psychology. And I prefer not to use these kinds of terms because, first of all, it's not my field, but also because in every context they have different meanings. So it's better to use one's own terms, even though there might be similar terms. Within the Vajrayana Buddhist tradition, The mind is described on 3 levels. The terms are coarse level, subtle level, and very subtle level. And together with the coarse, subtle, and very subtle level, there's also the gross level of the body. So coarse, subtle, and very subtle. And together with the body, there's also the coarse speech, subtle speech, and very subtle speech. Something that's often not said, but I'm more and more convinced that body, speech, and mind are inseparable. There are 3 manifestations of the same thing. It's not possible for there to be the mind without the body or vice versa. But they go together. Where there's the gross or coarse mind, there's the coarse body. And where there's the subtle mind, there's a subtle body. Where there's a very, very subtle mind, there's the very subtle body. This is very important for us to understand. Because if we want to reach a certain state, we need to work on all sides. We can't try to divide body and mind as if they were separate, as if one had nothing to do with the other. There would be empty spaces, unresolved areas, and we could even do, how can I say, as if it's as if we would be walking in two opposite directions. So the mental and the physical, they go together. So everything that happens in the mind happens also in the body. Everything that happens in the body happens in the mind too. The coarse mind has to do mostly with our perception of the 6 senses. The gross mind is the manifested mind. It's the part of ourselves that perceives form, sound. It's said that there are 6 consciousnesses. There's of eyesight, of sound, of smell, of taste, and the consciousness of touch, and the mental consciousness. It's the part of the mind, let's say, the conceptual part of our mind. It's the part of our mind that perceives our projections of the past, of the future, that judges the present. It's the more conceptual part, also on an emotional level, but manifested. So in this present moment, what we're able to perceive, that we're aware of, that's called our coarse mind. This is clear enough, isn't it? And it goes together with the coarse or gross body. The coarse body, has to do with our body that can be seen. The definition is the parts of our body that can be seen with by eyesight. So our organs, our skin, but the entire body is connected to the coarse mind. If we go to look for the mind in the body, if we needed to to point the finger in our body, where is our mind? We have a view that is modern, but it's also it's passé. The idea that our mind is in the brain. Our mind. Let me give you an example. Is it connected to our hormones or not? Yes, absolutely. Do the hormones have connections to other organs in our body? Yes. Our digestive system now is called the second brain. So the mind is throughout the entire body. There's not a specific area of our body. It's connected to our entire body. And here's something. This is a point of reflection, and I don't have a real answer here, but just as a point of reflection, a doctor friend, talked to me about a book where a researcher they looked at people who had a heart transplant, and what had changed, looked at what had changed after the heart transplant. And something quite particular, not in all cases, but in many cases, is that when one receives the heart of someone else, normally the receiver doesn't know who the donor was. So there's no connection between the families. It's all anonymous. But it came out that those who received the hearts started having personality traits of donors. And there was one case, it was actually a child who received the heart. She was about 6 or 9 years old. And obviously it's very difficult to have a heart transplant as a child. Also, a child that dies, I mean, they're very rare, the cases that a child can die and have the organ ready for a heart transplant. So this child who received the heart started having dreams and really nightmares of being killed. And the mother then spoke to the doctor. The doctor knew about the donor, and then the doctor spoke to the police. And through the actual nightmares of the child who received the heart, the memories that she had, she was able to give information to the police, and they were actually able to find the murderer of this child. Incredible. Another story, there was a lady who received a heart. She was a very, let's say, a very dignified, educated lady, and after the heart transplant, she became really vulgar, screaming in the hallways. And then the researcher found out that the heart actually came from a woman who was extremely extroverted and was, let's say, colorful in this way. So the coarse mind and the coarse body are strongly connected. It's not that they receive the mind of this person. Someone, for example, who has a stroke, where there's actually a neurological problem in the brain. I mean, this affects the gross mind. I mean, it depends on what part of the brain is damaged. That can affect movement or speech, or. But it's said that in the old texts, it's said that the mind is like the horse rider, and the body is the horse. So the horse, though, is blind, and the rider is lame. So in just a few words, the horse doesn't know where to go if it's not directed, and the rider can't go where the horse can't reach. During our lifetime, as we're raised, as we grow with experiences that we have with our emotions, our interactions, and all the rest, we gradually, more and more, we establish, how can I say, paths. Our body gets used to certain emotions, certain experiences, and certain experiences are deeply marked. It's like if you always take the same road, that path is clearly marked. Just look here at the center, from the stupa to the road. There's actually a path that's marked, because that's where people constantly walk. So when we have certain experiences, certain emotions, as if, this is my theory, certain paths are created, are set, and they are marked within all our organs. So when one receives a transplant, the mind of that person follows what's already there. There are many aspects of the body that are connected to the mind. Anyway, this all of this to say that we can't underestimate our body. We should take care of our body. Like everything that happens in our mind has an enormous effect on our body. And I just say once again, we need to be careful to not fall into one extreme or the other. The tendency of, excuse me if I use this term in a little sarcastic way, the tendency of Buddhists, let's say, is oh, everything's in the mind. Oh, but everything depends only on the mind. It's always in the mind. Yes and no. It's not all in the mind, because when you have hormonal problems, the mind reflects that. When there's a physical problem of even what you eat and how much you sleep, there are many things that have a direct effect on the mind, right? On the other side, what happens for our thoughts and emotions has a strong effect in the body. For example, we talk about, what's it called? The placebo effect, for example. This is something known, and I don't think we use it that much now, but even before, doctors had placebo pills for certain patients, because there were certain patients that were, full of, a little hypochondriac, fear of one sickness or another. We're all a little hypochondriac, some more, some less. And, in this case, it's the doctors know that this kind of person, has this great fear, gives them a placebo pill. It'll it tells them that it'll pass, because there's that trust, and there's the trust that that medicine will help. This is something that has been proven. When I believe that something will be beneficial to me, then the tendency is that it will actually work. But there's also another effect, which is the nocebo effect. The nocebo effect is, I'm sure that this is bad for me, and then it then becomes harmful. It's the same thing. So I think we need to be, when we have a very, very healthy life, we need to be careful about the nocebo effect. The healthiest effects, I said, there's without this substance, and at the end of the day, it's underlining, this is bad for you, this is bad for you, this is bad. Oh, I ate a little bit of this, what's going to happen to me? And we start getting into we start feeling fearful, or we're convinced that this substance is bad for us. And I'm not saying that there aren't substances that are harmful to some people, but for example, like I can't eat lentils anymore. Unfortunately, I say unfortunately because I really, really like lentils. A few months ago, I was in America, and I had gone to see Michel Rinpoche, and we were at lunch together at his house. Obviously, when you're a guest in someone's house, you're not there to choose what to eat and not to eat, especially in a context in which I found myself. And they had already cooked a vegetarian lunch for me because I don't eat meat. And so they made rice and dal. And I said, okay, I'll eat it without any problem. But in my mind, and I was convinced that it would be fine. And actually, nothing happened. So there is a part of the substance, but our mind is very powerful too. So just to end this side note, let's be careful with the nocebo effect. Obviously, if we have experiences with certain food intolerances or allergies, For a long time, I tried to pretend that I could eat cheese, but I can't anymore. I mean, the effect was clear, and it still is, unfortunately. So what happens is one needs to take care of one's body, but without being paranoid, because the more fearful we are about something, the more that will materialize on the other side. What happens in our body has a direct effect on our emotional mental state, a little bit like the design of the two arrows. So one goes like the design of recycling. So what happens in the body happens in the mind, and what happens in the mind happens in the body, and we need to be very careful to not create vicious cycles, because this becomes one of the problems. I'm in a physical state that brings me a greater feeling of anxiety. I project that anxiety onto something that then generates more anxiety for me. And then when the body is in that anxious state, that influences the mind, and then the mind then reflects that again on the body, and we can create an excess of wind wind humor, as it's called in Tibetan medicine. That's a vicious cycle, just to get to the conclusion that body and mind are together, and we need to take care of both of them together. The coarse speech is our ability to speak on a gross level. It's our verbal speech, but also what we emanate from our gross body. So I'm convinced that the coarse speech is not just the verbal sounds that we actually emit, because we communicate on many levels. On a coarse level, with our coarse body, with our gross body, we communicate with the expression of our body, the movements, the hormones that we emit. This has to do with what we call the coarse speech, a coarse body. So this shows us that if we want to have a certain mental state on a coarse level, we need to accompany that with, if we want to have a certain speech, we need to accompany that with our body. And I was reading a little bit the Liberation in the Palm of Your Hand by Albagnano Rinpoche that we have here. It was translated also into Italian, into English. It's one of the most important books within our tradition. And towards the end of the book, there's the whole chapter on meditative concentration. It's called Liberation in the Palm of Your Hand. Lam Rim Nangtro Lapto. It's a book to read slowly, and if you're interested in this book, one needs to remember that it was a transcription of teachings that were given in Tibet in a monastic context. So already a different cultural context. And it's a book to read very slowly because it's deep. There are many, many aspects, but it's extremely important. You can even take ideally you start from beginning, go to the end, but it's possible that you can also look at specific chapters, like everything that has to do with samadhi, meditative concentration. And he talked specifically about, he said that before beginning to meditate and put effort into developing meditative concentration, one needs to create the right conditions. Because one enemy that exists for meditation is mental agitation. Imagine that once we've prepared ourselves a little bit this morning, yesterday, when one is sitting silently, I think that everyone has had the experience of the mind that jumps around a little bit. at least. And normally when the mind goes somewhere, it goes towards abstract objects or objects of our senses. Things that we've seen, that we've heard, that we can smell, that we feel. They're the objects of our senses. And the stronger the sensory stimuli are, the more space they take up in our mind. For example, when we eat a food that's really delicious, that experience, the space that takes up in our mind, does that end when we finish the food? Or do we think about, oh, that was so delicious. When can I find that? When can I eat that again? How can I find that food again? It takes up space in our mind. And when we eat something horrible, that imprint remains, doesn't it? The same. I think that the imprint of something delicious is stronger, but both stay for it's the same thing for all sensory experiences. When we're in a period of our life that we want to develop more meditative concentration and stability, it's important in that period, starting before and during the whole training period, to not have sensory experiences that are too strong, because sensory experiences that are strong, they take up more space in our mind. I think that's quite clear, isn't it? So let's remember, there's nothing wrong. It's not like, oh, eating something delicious is a sin. No, there's nothing wrong with it. It's simply that it takes up space in our mind, and then we sit down to meditate and we think about, oh, that was so delicious. Where can I find that again? I mean, that's what happens. I mean, nothing wrong. But if we're trying to keep our mind still on one object, it's a little bit like someone, for example, who tries to develop meditative concentration during when when one is falling in love. Where does the mind go? Or even if one tries to develop meditative concentration when one is full of anger. That's why it said that when we want to meditate, when we want to dedicate a period to develop meditative concentration, it's better to do it in a context where there aren't objects of strong attraction or aversion. I imagine the situation like this. I'm home to do a retreat. I'm meditating. At a certain point, I hear the neighbor. If the neighbor is indifferent, if I feel indifference towards this neighbor, then I'm not disturbed. If instead I have a strong aversion towards the neighbor, then I think, oh, it doesn't even let me meditate. Oh, here he is again, making up this. And it just really fills up our inner space. And instead we have a lot of attraction to that neighbor. Oh, he's home. What's he doing? Oh, when I finish this session, I'll go and say hi. So what happens is, it's not just noise. It's not mere noise. Somehow we need to be careful to not have strong stimuli so that we can control our mind better. Once we have a stronger level of concentration, we can be in the middle of chaos and still keep our mind controlled. But the practitioners, what they've always done is that first they look for a healthy place to meditate, to train, with few distractions. Given that most of us, it's not that we go to do a retreat, to develop meditative concentration, and we cut ourselves off from everything else to do only that. It's said that if it does that to develop meditative concentration, then one needs a maximum of 6 months to reach that state of meditative samadhi, the calm abiding. So that means that in 6 months one does only that and cuts off all the various distractions. In the meantime, since we're not doing that, in the meantime, let's try to diminish our distractions, the things that we see, that we read, that we do that are not necessary, and also strong sensorial experiences, because it's part, it has to do with our body, but it takes up an enormous space in our mind. So this is the body and mind on a coarse level. On a subtle level, the subtle mind is described, it's based mostly on 3 states: attraction, aversion, and indifference. Let me give you an example. In this moment, I am not angry, and looking around, I don't see anyone that is demonstrating signs of anger. We're not angry, right? But does this mean that we don't have anger? Just, it's enough to bring an object of anger and we'll see what happens. So the anger that I have that it's currently not manifest, where is it? In the subtle mind. So the subtle mind, these are the aspects of our mind, emotional and not only, that are not manifest. It's there underneath. And it works also on a non-manifest way. It's not that it's just stagnant. And someone might ask, is this a subconscious? I don't know. Surely certainly there will be similar aspects. I prefer not to say that, yes, it is the subconscious, because that's a different way of classifying the mind. But these are aspects of the mind that are strongly linked to the subtle body. The subtle body is something physical, but that cannot be seen with the naked eye. For example, we have the energy that flows within our body, that's connected to our nervous system, that's connected to our lymphatic system, connected to our circulatory system. These are strongly linked to our subtle mind. It's said that the subtle mind is described as winds, channels, lung, or from Sanskrit, prana is wind. Maybe you've heard prana, like this idea of prana in the Chinese context, we say qi. This is strongly linked to the nervous system and connected to our subtle body. So we have wind, according to the certain movements that our body on a subtle level, that strongly influences emotional states of ours. So we have wind, channels, and drops. And so even on a subtle level, we communicate on a subtle level too. And then we have body, speech, and mind on a very subtle level, where the very subtle mind is a state of our mind where there aren't any conceptual thoughts, there aren't any emotions of attraction or aversion. It's the state of our mind where there are only the imprints of our emotions, our habits, and they're imprints. It's a level where we see there are the seeds, but there aren't any sprouts. It's very similar as a description to our DNA, actually. From the little that I was able to see and understand, when we talk about DNA, the DNA, when we talk about the DNA, it's not determining, but it works on probability. So what happens on a genetic level with our DNA, it said that there's this probability, there's this possibility for this to manifest or not according to the interactions. It said that on our genetic level it shows up or not according to the external environment and our internal environment where we interact. These are terms that are used in epigenetics. And from the little that I've been able to see, it says that what wakes up an aspect of our DNA or another is the interaction with the environment, where the external environment, the things that we see, the places we go, the people that we meet, our interactions through our senses on an external level. This is the external environment. And instead our emotions, our thoughts, etc., this is our inner environment. And what wakes up one part or another of our DNA is mostly the inner environment, which of course has a relationship with the external environment. And it's also said that what we experience on a gross level externally also shapes and transforms us, actually transforms our DNA. This is science. In ancient teachings, it said that the very subtle mind is where there are the imprints of our experiences, where there are the predispositions with which we are born and that we bring with us from life to life. And during our lifetime, we reshape them. All the experiences that we live on a gross level, they on a gross level, on a subtle level, they actually shape, they wake up, or they create new imprints on a very subtle level. So, in other words, as long as something is manifest on a subtle and coarse level, first of all, we need a predisposition on a very subtle level. It's like saying, for there to be a plant, you need a sprout, and for there to be a sprout, you need a seed. No matter how perfect the external environment I create is, if I don't have seeds to grow strawberries, I won't have strawberries. Every child is born with his own predispositions on a physical level, on a genetic level, let's call it, but also from the very subtle mind. And then according to the life that one lives and the experiences he lives, he wakes up certain predispositions or others. So just the ultimate analysis, if we modify something on a coarse level, which is the easiest, what happens is if we don't have that same state that developed on a more subtle level, it's not going to withstand that change. It's like the more subtle the level, these are the foundations of the iceberg. So or if we look at a tree, no matter how much I prune a tree, if the trunk and the roots are not healthy or are very healthy, it's going to keep growing. But if I cut off all the branches, but if the roots are there, the trunk is there, the branches are going to grow again. So our objective is to work on a subtle level to get to a very subtle level. Our objective is not to develop knowledge, understand things, but to change our deeper habits and deeper predispositions more than accumulating knowledge. And to do this, there are two actions that are possible, let's say, to create something on a subtle level and thus on a very subtle level. One is when we have a very strong experience. There are experiences in our lives that are not conceptual and they have a very, very strong impact on us that leave an imprint for our entire life. Events that we live, things that happen in our life that leave a strong imprint on a positive level and also on a negative level. Unfortunately, we see mostly the negative ones, but both exist. And then there's a gradual process of transformation that comes, a training where I generate a mental state on a gross level that influences the very subtle, that then leaves the influence on the very subtle level. It takes a long time. In other words, if I generate something on a gross level, I'm familiarizing myself on a gross coarse level, so that I can connect. If I can familiarize my mind on a very subtle on a subtle level, I need to familiarize myself on a subtle level. And maybe tomorrow we can talk also about familiarizing ourselves on the very subtle level. Is one of the key points of Tantra, Buddha, Vajrayana Buddhism, being able to access the very subtle mind. That would be the top. But getting back to us now, where we are, one of the important things about meditation is allowing ourselves to generate a positive state, and little by little allow that state to permeate our being, not just on a conceptual level, but to go beyond a conceptual level. So we start with a conceptual level, then to get to an experiential level. When it's experiential and not conceptual, the longer we stay in that non-conceptual state, the deeper the imprint that is left within us. Is that concept clear? I want to explain this because in our culture, we like understanding things. And to understand a little bit what's behind all of this, this process is divided into 3 phases. In Tibetan, Tupa, Sampa, and Gompa, or Tu Sam Gom Sum. Tu Sam Gom Sum. Sum means 3. Tu is listening. Sam means reflecting or understanding. Gom means familiarize. Because one thing is developing a meditative state, which is extremely important, but developing a meditative concentration, but then I go to meditate on something that is not virtuous. Then and I familiarize myself with that thing. In many traditions, religious, spiritual traditions in ancient India, I say this for what I've read in Buddhist traditions, many traditions put a lot of emphasis in the objective of non-conceptual meditative stabilization, where one empties one's mind from conceptual thoughts, and one doesn't look at the past, doesn't project towards the future, and stays in this pleasurable state. It's a state where there's no sensation of suffering, or there's not even one specific feeling of pleasure. One stays in a kind of emptiness, a kind of neutrality. And what the masters of Buddhism have explained, that one can stay in this state for a long period of time, but when one comes out of this state, the predispositions of before are still present, because our mind has a very clear characteristic, which is to eliminate a certain level of thought on any level, a certain habit, a certain type of thought. Let's say thought. We need to generate a thought that is directly opposite. So if I have an attitude of extreme selfishness, I need to generate an attitude of altruism, where there's miserliness, I need to generate generosity. Where there's hate and anger, love should be generated. We need to generate the attitude that is directly opposite. Otherwise, it's like having land where there are chili pepper seeds. Let's say that that chili peppers are bad. They're not, but let's say they're bad. And instead, I want sweet fruit. I don't like spicy. But if I don't do something that substitutes the peppers, if I don't, even if I plant sweet fruit, the peppers are going to grow, the chili peppers are going to grow just the same. So it's not enough to block the mind from conceptual thoughts in general. We need to generate states of consciousness that are directly opposite the ones that we want to eliminate. Okay? So, in this process, there are these three phases: listening, then understanding, to then meditate or familiarize, let's say. Let's start with an example. It's one of the first meditations that is done. One weak point that we have, in generally speaking, is the fact that we live our life to survive, trying to have pleasures, trying to avoid suffering, and we end up living our life as an end in and of itself and not as a tool. Very often, we don't have an objective that transcends our own life, that transcends life itself. Is that clear? So what happens when we don't have an objective that transcends our lifetime? We end up spending a lot of time surviving, experiencing pleasures, avoiding suffering in general, trying to distract ourselves. And everyone distracts himself with a different thing, even within the spiritual realm, religious realm, there's a lot of distraction. Excuse me if I say it like that, but it's true. So the first point that we need to develop is recognizing the preciousness of the opportunity that we have, and understand that we have an opportunity that is not easy to receive, and which has enormous potential to help us reach states of being that transcends this existence and can help us also help others. I wasn't planning on opening this topic. I just wanted to give an example, but let's just touch on it without getting into it too deeply. Yesterday we talked about the fact that problems that exist on a global level they arise from the mind of human beings, social, environmental, economic, geopolitical. All these problems come from mind of men and women, humans. And the mind of humans is malleable, and it works on the basis of habit and repetition. And unfortunately, most of us, we use our mind to think about, to experience. We experience things on the basis of reactions. We're constantly reacting to what happens around us. Instead, there is the possibility to act with awareness, because our mind, like our body, our being, let's say, is constantly in transformation. But there's the possibility of transforming ourselves without awareness. as a kind of simple reaction to what happens around us, or we can shape ourselves in with awareness, where we give ourselves a direction. We mostly our inner experiences. We have a direction to shape ourselves with awareness. We need three conditions. There are at least these three. There are more, but at least these three. We need to be in a state where our basic needs are covered. Because if I'm hungry, where does my mind go? I just am concerned about finding food. If I have a lot of pain, my attention is trying to overcome my pain. If I live in a material context where there's a lot of danger, or if in the middle of a war, or where there's a lot of violence, do I have inner space to sit down and meditate? Very difficult. One needs to be highly trained to do so. So the first condition is to have basic needs covered on a minimal level. To have food, to be to not have to worry about one's own survival or safety. So looking globally, what's the percentage of people who have this luxury? I don't remember the precise numbers. Many years ago I saw the numbers, but we can say that there's an enormous quantity of people who live hungry, many others who live in states where they're not hungry, but they're just over the poverty line, and they live to survive. We saw this with the lockdown and the COVID. Just 6 months of not working. Many people didn't have homes anymore, and they couldn't put food on their table. So there are many people who are above the poverty line, but they can't stop running the race. Otherwise, they're not going to be able to survive. Then there's a whole other part of the population that is quite wide, that has the basic needs covered without great problems, but at the same time, they're slaves of money, slaves of pleasure, slaves of power, slaves of distraction, or rather, where one is not able to go beyond these things. One lives for these distractions and these pleasures. Even we look around, our acquaintances, the people we know, the world around us, in our society, the percentage of people who have their basic needs covered and want to make their life meaningful. I don't mean that they're able to make it meaningful, but that they want to, where they're able to see and say, it's not enough to have to just avoid suffering and look for pleasures. That my life must be worth more or mean more. Is that the majority or the minority? It's unfortunately the minority. Just look at that. Look at advertising. That tells us, buy this car and your life will be worth something. I mean, so does the ad say, buy this car and your life will be meaningful, or does it say, buy this car and you will be handsome and successful and loved? So all of this to say that that first condition is very difficult to have. The second condition is having someone who guides us correctly along a spiritual path. And with this, I don't mean to say that it has to be Buddhist. What happens is we learn and we transform ourselves based on the interactions that we have. if I interact always with others who have a certain worldview, then I'm strongly influenced by that. So how many are those who have this opportunity to interact with people who, on an inner spiritual level, um, and who are able to have a clear path to follow and a healthy guide? So this is a very, very small percentage of people, even within spiritual area. If we were to do a kind of survey, so if we have let's look at a survey and just look at the prayers requests on a global level. Prayers for health, prayers for study, prayers for work, prayers for love, prayers for problems to resolve, etc. And then we have prayers to develop more love and patience, to overcome one's own ignorance and anger, etc. What's the percentage here? Obviously, imagine that the prayer requests to overcome one's own ignorance are the majority, right? Unfortunately not. Even within the religious realm, very often we use religious or spiritual tools for mundane reasons. So, because what distinguishes between worldly and spiritual is, how can I describe it? Does that thing that we do, is it for this life or does it transcend this life? The material part doesn't transcend this life. Knowledge, power, material things, these are all mundane, worldly things. That which transcends this life, to connect with what we said before, these are the imprints that are in our very subtle mind and body. So on a deep level, within these imprints, patience, love, anger, resentment, or anything that we develop on a deep, deep level that we have an imprint for, this we take with us, that transcends this life. So what is done to transform ourselves on that level is a spiritual practice. Everything else is worldly. Sorry if I'm so clear somehow, but so when we see even religious practices, spiritual practices, how much is spiritual, and how many techniques are used to encourage our own ego or to diminish our anxiety. Nothing wrong with diminishing our anxiety, but we need to have someone who can direct us on a spiritual level, who's able to interact with us in a way that helps us to transform our qualities, transform our being in the development of our inner qualities. This is the second necessary quality. The third necessary condition, beyond having basic needs covered, beyond having he or she who guides us correctly, the third is having the passion and the desire to walk this path, because I can have all the material, if I have all the material conditions satisfied, and I have also someone to guide me, but if I don't want to walk this spiritual path, I'm not going to go. I can be surrounded by high spiritual beings and be the most mundane of all. It depends on how much we want it. So these three conditions Are they easy to obtain? Are they commonplace? No. Buddha Shakyamuni described that the probability of having these three conditions is the same probability that exists. It would be like a turtle that lives at the bottom of the sea that is blind and deaf and has a very, very, very long life, and every 100 years comes up for air. In the ocean, there's one buoy, the golden buoy. And it's the probability of this turtle coming up for air every 100 years and putting his head through this buoy. This is within these the three conditions. It's also having a healthy. There are other conditions that cover that first one of having our necessary, of having our basic needs covered, and also having our senses intact, not being slaves, not being prisoners, etc. But we have these conditions, but this doesn't mean that we're better than anyone else. It just means that we have marvelous conditions, but it depends on how much value we give to this and how much we use these conditions. One master of Lama Ganchen, one of the most important contemporary masters, Geshe Yeshe Wanchuk, and he gave this example. He said, if someone gives you a printer to print money legally, is something that nobody has. Let's say that you're given this money printer. I don't know why it's given to you, but it's given to you. What are we going to do with that printer? We just put it in the basement. We say, oh, tomorrow I don't have time to print money. Oh, tomorrow we'll see if I've got time. I think, in my opinion, we'll put it in the living room near the kitchen with the bathroom not too far away, and we just start printing money. Also, because there's a rule when we're given this printer, is that when the person wants it back, we have to give it back, and we don't know when that will be. So more than money, what we want, what we've always wanted, is living in a state of peace and balance and well-being. I mean, that's what we want more than anything else. These three conditions that we have, these are the ones that really allow us to do that which is necessary to eliminate that which generates suffering and help us to develop what brings happiness. So it said that these three conditions are worth more. It's called the jewel. It's worth more than the jewel that satisfies every desire. Today, that would be maybe a bank account with $5 billion or $1 billion. I don't know how many mundane desires you have, but the more you have, the more you want. That's the problem. Let's say we had a bank account with a tremendous amount of money inside. Can we, with that money, obtain a long standing state of peace and satisfaction and peace, well-being? No. Unfortunately, no. I say unfortunately no, because if it worked, then at least that is possible, but no. And it's for this reason that it said that these three conditions actually allow us. It said that they are more precious than the wish-granting gem. So if we have a life, or we have our basic needs covered, we have a spiritual guide to show us the path, and we want to follow, and our objective is to grow spiritually, develop love and stability, joy, satisfaction, consistency, wisdom, passion, and thus eliminate, as a consequence of that, eliminate our anger, our resentment, our nervousness, anxiety, fear. This is incoherence, ignorance. To do that, to be able to do that is worth more than anything else. If we were in front of this choice, do you want the wish-granting gem to satisfy worldly needs, or the conditions so that you can develop yourself spiritually? I think many would answer maybe a little bit of both. In Tibetan, there's a proverb that says, people need things and things need owners. In other words, when I have something, a part of my time, my life is dedicated to that thing. So even accumulating more and more often means that there's a part of our life that's dedicated to that. So are we able to connect a little bit with this opportunity that we have in this moment in our lives? But this awareness of the preciousness of this life, it's rare and precious, because it's not that everything that is rare is precious. We have something is rare in the sense that there are very few who have these conditions. And I should repeat, this doesn't make us better than anyone else. It just means that we have conditions that sooner or later will end, and they're not going to last forever. So we have a rare, unique opportunity. But how aware are we about this in our daily lives? Do we wake up in the morning and say, oh, what an amazing, rare and precious life. I can't waste a single day because these conditions I won't find easily? Or do we wake up in the morning and say, oh, what am I going to do today? Oh, I need to do this, that, and the other. I have to go here. I need to resolve this problem. I need to do this other thing. And then when we finish our list of to-dos, I'm tired. Okay, I'll watch a movie, something. And in the middle of this, every once in a while, okay, I should try to recite a mantra here or do a meditation there. Maybe before I go to bed, I listen to Lama who's teaching, or put on something in the car, something in the middle. How aware really are we of the preciousness of this life? Not very. And it's said that the first quality that we need to develop in our spiritual path is to realize on a non-conceptual level the preciousness of this life. And how do we do that? The first thing is listening, what we just did. One completes the process of listening when one develops what's called a correct supposition. It's when we're sure about something, even we've heard about it, we've read about it, we're convinced about it, it's precious. Very few have this opportunity, and with this opportunity, I can really reach a deep state of peace. I can do something also to be of benefit to others, because at the end of the day, really, what does this world need today? People of wisdom, of love, of peace. This is what the world needs most. And when we see one person who has a elevated state of wisdom and love and peace, it influences us greatly. Let's take the example close to us with Lama Michel Rinpoche. One of the characteristics of Lama Michel that was very special. I can't say all, but most of the people who came into contact with him, their life was touched deeply, not by his words, but by his being. When someone has a state that of a high level of wisdom and love, his presence and the interaction with these qualities brings a deep change to others, and this is what the world needs most. I think about Mother Teresa of Calcutta, and she impacted thousands and thousands and thousands of people, and indirectly millions of people. But the impact that she had was not thanks to her knowledge or her schooling, but her being. And it's what the planet needs the most is having people that are the embodiment of peace, of love, of wisdom. So even the best investment that we can have for ourselves, for our families, for our society is to develop ourselves to a person with more joy, more wisdom, more love. So we listen to all of this and we get to the conclusion that we have a unique opportunity here. If someone asks us, "What do you do? What do you do?" We can answer, I try to develop more love, more wisdom. I try to develop a view that is more coherent with reality. This is what I do. When I say, no, what do you do? What do you do to live? Oh, okay. Well, for my livelihood, I work in the bank. I'm a teacher. I do this, that, and the other. But that's not what I do in life. One thing is how I take care of my livelihood. Another thing is what I do in my life, what my life is for. I have a life at the service of developing my qualities and serving others so that helping them to do the same. This is where we should get to in our feelings after we've listened to talking about the preciousness of this life. We listen to it, but then after we've gotten to this point, then we forget about it because other things come. And then we need to regenerate this feeling again. But once we hear again and we get to this conclusion, this life is so precious, I can't waste it. Once that's spontaneous, once we've heard that and we get to that and that feeling, then we need, and we're sure about it, then we need to understand it. When we start to debate about it, we start to explain it to others, we get into a kind of analytical process about it. And then we become deeply convinced. And it's no longer the repetition of what someone told us. It's not just about listening, but it's based on an experience. And at this point, we develop a correct inferential cognition. For example, I'm sure that there's smoke. I'm sure that there's a fire behind the house because I see smoke. I don't see the fire, but I know that where there's smoke, there's fire. That's a valid inferential cognition. When we become absolutely sure of the preciousness of this life, but not through what we've heard, but through our own process, it becomes something of my own, not something that I'm repeating, then I've concluded that phase of understanding. And at that point, and that's not enough, because even once I've understood, there's the moment of that comprehension that becomes very clear, but even there, after a while, we forget. Or rather, I can connect to that understanding, but there are many moments where I am not aware of it. And here, the longest of the phases begins. The phase of familiarization or meditation is where I need to induce into myself, I need to induce that state of certainty of the preciousness of this life, generate that inner state, and stay in meditation single-pointedly on this certainty of the preciousness of this life. How can I meditate on the preciousness of this life? By generating that inner state where I recognize and I feel deeply that I have conditions, unique and conditions that I feel in my gut, in my heart, in my gut. And when I'm able to stay single-pointedly for a long period of time, and then there too, when I finish my meditation, then that state of being vanishes too. And then I need to repeat it again and again and again. And there will be a moment where it's no longer a conceptual process, but that feeling of that deep feeling of preciousness of this life is spontaneous and is ever present. And this is what we call a direct experience. It's no longer conceptual experience. And here we talk about the realization of the preciousness of this life. This realization, it's explained that normally that it's first realized in meditation, where one concentrates on the concept, and little by little that concept, one familiarizes oneself more and more, and at a certain point it is no longer conceptual, it's something experiential, something deeper, something that we can no longer put into words, and this creates the basis to have this realization that is ever present with us. So we have listening, understanding, and then familiarizing or meditating to then realize. Is that clear, this process? I wanted to explain this process also to help you understand how meditation is a tool and not an end in and of itself. Because what does it mean to realize the preciousness of this life? It means not wasting life, not wasting our life with things that don't bring positive results, things that just end there, that don't help us, things that not wasting our time doing things that just end there and that don't help us develop ourselves spiritually. Or once we realize the preciousness of this life, we see also the beauty in this life. And once we've realized the preciousness of this life, we should realize the certainty of death. It's realizing how precious that money printer is, and also realizing that sooner or later they're going to take it away from me, that it's not ours. We think that our lives are our own, my life. But it's said that once the Lord of Death comes and says, "Come here, give it back to me." No, wait just a minute. I haven't finished. I still have another million to spend. No. The day that he comes, he comes. It's not that the Lord of Death is an actual entity. It's just the impermanence, it's death itself. And we're all part of this reality. And death has two fundamental characteristics. It's certainty. It's certain and uncertain at the same time. The death is certain. The moment of death is uncertain. That second realization after the preciousness of this life is the certainty of death and the uncertainty of the moment of death. For me, for example, today is the 12th of August. Tomorrow is an important day, the 13th of August. Why? Because last year, on that day, the 13th of August, I had an anaphylactic shock. And for me, it was a blessing for two reasons. One, because having non-conceptual experiences of our own mortality are only good. That show us truly that we can't waste a day. And it's not just because it's written in a Dharma book that we're going to die. It's real. Not one. I can die in any moment, at any moment. And it's not a philosophical question. We don't know when we will die. And the other thing that it was really good for me because that brought me to make certain important decisions for my health. So the consequence was seeing, okay, am I living my life the way I should? If I were to die today, are there things that I would be doing differently? Because then what happens is here we're just postponing. Oh no, this I'd like to do it differently, but now I can't. Oh, that thing I'd like to do, but I don't have the full conditions. I'll do it another time. And life goes on. So every once in a while, when death looks at us in the face, and we take stock of the reality of it, we wake up a little bit. Okay, what am I going to do now? And the opportunity that we have, when I think about myself, if I were to die today, and let's say that I have the possibility to choose where I'll be reborn, and that's already asking a lot. In reality, we are completely free to choose. All beings choose freely where they are reborn, but they're not free from their own ignorance, attachment, and aversion. In their own conditioning. Okay? So if I asked each one of you to choose an object here on the table, would we choose the same object? No, because each one is influenced by his own attraction, aversion, vision, and the same thing happens when we die. But let's say that I could choose with clarity and awareness where I be reborn. It's not easy. What country? Choose your parents. How can I know? And when I think about in this life, I had this opportunity to know people who guided me in a marvelous way, gave me such opportunities. I can't even imagine how I could recreate something similar. So I say, even if I had the total awareness and ability to choose, even having the same opportunities that I have today, it seems extremely difficult. Maybe it's not, but I don't see it as being something easy. So I have to use in the best way possible what I have now, because I don't know when I'll die. I know that I'll die. I don't know when. And I have no idea what kind of conditions I'll have afterwards. But I'm sure about one thing. The imprints that I create today, the deep experiences that I create today, I bring with me afterwards. This is important. So that second meditation is where we meditate on the certainty of death and the uncertainty of the moment of death. When we have familiarity with this, that influences our entire way of being and the priorities we give to everything. So, and now I want to go on and on with the next steps, but what I want to show you is that the meditation is an extremely important tool to transform our being, because there are different concepts, different states of consciousness that are extremely important. And there are others that are extremely important also to make us suffer. If I want to eliminate suffering and develop peace, I need to bring light where there is darkness. I need to develop altruism to eliminate anger and selfishness. It's the meditative process that helps me, but I need to look at specific points. It can't be 5 minutes in the middle of many other things. Nice. Instead, but maybe better not do it. But instead, if I take that feeling of the preciousness of this life, and I hold that feeling for a longer period, that the impact that has on a deeper level is much greater than doing 5 minutes a day for 10 days. I don't know if that's clear. So, why do we want to meditate? Because we want to change the habits, the deep habits that generate suffering to ourselves and others. Because we want to develop our own characteristics that allow us to live peacefully and in harmony with ourselves and others. In other words, we need to develop two wings: method, awareness, love, compassion, generosity, etc. And the other wing, wisdom. And with these two, we can really fly. This is why we want to meditate. It's not to reach a pleasurable meditative state where one relaxes a little bit. No, that's nice, and that would help, but that's not our objective. Okay? And for this, there are 3 types of meditation. This process of listening, understanding, and familiarizing. Is that clear? This is the process that we need to develop all qualities. This process is important to reflect on impermanence, the preciousness of this life, as we said before. We can go on and do thousands of examples. It's very practical. Anyway, on a practical level, there are 3 types of meditation. The first is called Chegom in Tibetan, which we can translate it as analytical meditation. Analytical meditation is where one brings one's presence to the present moment, free from distractions. One chooses one object of meditation, for example, the preciousness of this life, and one begins an analytical process that brings as a final result the generation of that mental consciousness, the state of consciousness. Everything we said before about this life being precious, that's all part of an analytical meditation. It's very similar to an equation. Imagine an equation, a very complex equation, but the result, let's say the result is 4. To be able to see 4 as the result of the equation, I need to repeat the equation. I don't see 4 and see the equation, so then I need to repeat the equation. I need to repeat the question. And then I get again to 4. When I do the entire equation, that 4 is the result of all of that. It's something, so one thing is 4, and one thing is 2 plus 2. Because 4 is not necessarily the result of 2 plus 2. When I say 2 plus 2, 4, I have 4 that contains the 2 plus 2. Is that clear? So in analytical meditation, I'm making an equation step by step. I see how difficult it is to have these material conditions, find someone to guide correctly. What does it mean to be guided correctly? To see that it's not obvious to actually practice sincerely and to not use spiritual means for worldly purposes. I do that whole process of that equation until I get to that final equation, final result, which is, wow, this is absolutely a unique experience that I can't throw away. So it gives me the opportunity to face my arrogance, my mental defilements, my ignorance, and develop myself positively. Once we've gotten to that conclusion, we have concluded the analytical meditation. It's as if we're explaining to someone we're explaining something to someone who doesn't believe. For example, how do we meditate on patience? First we start with an analytical meditation. An analytical meditation on patience is concluded when one comes to an inner conclusion that no matter what happens, it's not a reason to get angry. And one can put in the worst examples in front, and there's a whole logical process to that takes us to this conclusion. The conclusion, come what may, anger brings me only suffering, and it's never a reason to get angry. Once we get to that conclusion, we're done with the analytical process. And once we've done that, then we need to move on to single-pointed meditation. So analytical meditation is very important because it's what it generates our object of meditation, that which with we want to familiarize ourselves. Otherwise, I say, meditate on love. Sometimes we think that meditating on love is thinking about love or how beautiful it is to love. No, meditating on love means I need to generate within myself a sincere feeling of love and stay in that feeling. And at that point, I'm meditating on love. To generate a feeling of love, I need to induce that feeling, and I do that either with visualization or also it can also come through an analytical process. It's a mental process where we add, we subtract, and we get to this final conclusion. Is this clear? And this is very important for the things that we have understood but that we haven't realized. And once I've understood, I need to go back to that conclusion more again and again. It's interesting that when we generate the preciousness of this life naturally, the opposite mind which would be to take advantage of this life, or to see life as an end in and of itself instead of a tool. It's not possible to have that opposite mind. So I do this analytical meditation. It can also be done with others. Verbalizing the process, it's very interesting. There's the process of debate and studies. The traditional the Tibetan Buddhist studies use debate to deepen understanding of a subject, trying to see all the different sides possible. And one can try to do, it's not that obvious, but you can play a little bit with this, is to talk to someone. Okay, let's pick a subject. Let's talk about anger. Convince me that there are no reasons possible to get angry. So one is the devil's advocate, and the other one tries to convince him, independently of what you believe or not. It's a mental game until through this logical, coherent process that one actually convinces the other that there's no reason in the world to get angry, and then the other one tries to convince the other of the opposite, getting to deeper and deeper aspects. This analytical process is a key. It's a kind of shortcut to get to certain states of consciousness. Because if I tell you, now generate a feeling of the preciousness of this life, how can you do that? Or we need to go back to a memory when we had a strong feeling of the preciousness of this life and try to connect to that memory, which is not easy. Otherwise, we need to go into a logical process result. And one could say, okay, yes, but that's a coarse level. Yes, because before generating something on a deeper level, we need to generate it on a coarse, gross level. And then staying in that state, in the meditative state, helps us familiarize ourselves with deeper levels. So we train in those states once, twice, 3 times, 1,000 times, little by little. Single-pointed meditation, instead, we choose an object of meditation. As we said yesterday, any phenomenon can be an object of meditation, but better choose an object that makes sense. So that I can try to meditate on hate, for example. Is it possible to meditate on hate? I do an analytical meditation, based on my anger towards someone. I have all these reasons to be angry with this person. I generate that strong feeling of hate, and I meditate on that. But it's possible, but that brings only more suffering. So the choice of object of meditation is extremely important. At the beginning, we choose neutral objects of meditations that are a kind of bridge between external reality and inner reality. Because if we try to meditate at the beginning with an object of meditation that is abstract, it's very difficult. If we try to meditate on something that is very concrete, something external, then our attention goes too much outside. So we need to find this bridge between our inner and outer realities, and one's own breath is really a wonderful bridge. Or mental images, for example. It's very common to start meditating on the image of the face of Buddha, or one that comes to us. We choose an image and we try to keep that as an object of meditation. But at the beginning, in my opinion, one of the easiest and most beneficial way is to start with our breath. So in single-pointed meditation, it's where we choose one object of meditation and we rest our mind on that object. In this process, naturally, other thoughts will arise. And when other thoughts arise, what we do is we don't block those other thoughts, because if we try to stop or block these thoughts, they become stronger. So we don't block other thoughts, but at the same time, we don't follow them. We don't engage. We create a certain distance, and we maintain possibly our attention on the object. We see the thought that comes, and as it comes, we just let it go. We try not to grasp at this other thoughts. We don't enter into a dialogue with this thought, and we don't try to block it. Simply, sweetly, kindly, we just bring our attention back to our object of meditation. Okay? This is the process. This is the process to develop meditative concentration. So we choose an object. It could be our breath, the feeling of the air that comes in and out of our nose. We choose our object and we try simply to stay there on this object. When other thoughts come, we don't grasp at that thought, but we bring our attention back to our object of meditation. At the beginning, it's more of a fight. One tries to stay there, and then thoughts come, and then other thoughts come, and then we start feeling, inadequate, and I'm not going to manage this. But even as Trisha Rinpoche said, the master of Lama Ganshan said to an attendant, that thought that thing you've forgotten will come to you when trying to meditate. I know people who actually use meditation techniques to connect to their own intuition related to work, to other things. So they spend some time in that state called meditation. I'm not sure what they're actually doing, and then at a certain point, when something from nothing, let's say, when these thoughts come, then they access, let's say, access their intuitions or creative process ideas. But the idea of meditation is not that. The meditation is letting the mind rest on one object. Let's remember that we shouldn't constrict the mind, force the mind. Is very important. A meditative state should not be a state of constriction, of forcing, which is our natural tendency, unfortunately, because if I say concentrate on this, what's the face of a concentrated person? It's not this. One's not relaxed, but actually the state, it's constricting the mind, forcing the mind. When we force something naturally, we're doing the opposite There's kind of an inner rebellion. So the more we try to force our mind to stay still, the more our mind will try to run away, go somewhere else. Instead, we need to try to allow our mind to rest and to rest on the object of meditation. That's why the exercise we did yesterday and this morning too, and I explained it yesterday, is very important, just to allow ourselves to simply be without forcing our mind to do anything. And when we try simply just to be without without being influenced by external stimuli, the mind will go round and round, but at a certain point it'll get tired. and we'll look for a place to rest. And that's where we need to be sly and say, here you are, stay here. So we offer a place for our mind to rest. And there's someone out there who just wants to wander. Let him wander. At a certain point, he'll get tired and come back. Like the bird that takes flight from the deck of a boat in the middle of the ocean, flies around until he needs to land once again on the deck of the boat. So the same's true with our mind. Our mind will have to come back to the present moment. So that first exercise, at the beginning it seems kind of long, but little by little one starts to feel pleasure in just being. And at that point, we offer a comfortable space here. Stay here. We offer our mind a place for it to rest. It can be our own breath or the image of the Buddha or something else. But let's stay on the breath. And at that point, we say, here, stay here. And then when it wants to go away, no, you've wandered enough. Now we just stay here. And we bring kindly our mind back to our object of meditation until it becomes little by little, one feels less resistance to just being and being still. Is that clear as a process, as a path? Because the meditative state is a state where there's no inner resistance in staying where one is. So when we're there and we observe our breath and if our mind starts to go somewhere, what do? We allow it to come back to our breath. And to do this during our process, there are two tools that we need to use. Jempa and Shershing in Tibetan. And there are many different translations, but I'm never really convinced. It's a little bit difficult for me. But let me give you what the meaning is. Jempa, translated as is mindful recollection, it's about keeping the memory of what we're doing, the recollection of what we're doing. So, for example, if I start on a trip and I want to go from, let's say I take this path behind the Gompa and I want to get to the Santa Trinita, which is quite close. But as I'm walking, if I forget of where I'm going, I see something beautiful and I end up somewhere else. I get distracted. So I shouldn't forget where I'm going as I'm walking. On the other side, the other mind that's important is Shishing, which can be translated also as vigilance. Not only do I need to remember where I'm going, I need to also remember where I'm actually going. I can remember that where I want to go, but as I'm walking, I need to remember of every step, because I can think about where I want to go, but I can also get distracted and end up somewhere else. So I need to, if I have the mindful recollection on my breath, I know that I want to follow my breath, but my vigilance is a little bit more active, is the one that is guarding, controlling, and making sure that we are actually meditating on our breath. At the beginning, we don't even realize. So by the time we remember, we're somewhere else with our mind. What happens at the beginning, one tries to meditate, and then there's my object of meditation. Everything's fine. How wonderful. And then at a certain point, one realizes that one is on the other side of the world doing something totally different that has nothing to do with that. And when asked, how did I get here? So at that point, our object of meditation, we've lost. So instead of going right away back to our object of meditation, one can try to do the opposite process. For example, once I was in India and I was reading, and I was very concentrated. It was an important text that I was reading, and it had to do with the correct. It was a commentary of the three principal aspects of the path, and it was talking specifically about the correct view of reality. And then before I realized it, I was somewhere in Brazil. And then I asked myself how. And I thought, okay, this made me think of this. That made me think of that. That made me think of the house of someone, that they had a big crack in their wall. And in front of me, actually, as I was reading, there was a crack in the wall. And as I was reading, there was a fly that came by me, distracted me, ended up on the crack on the wall, which made me remember this, that, and the other. And before I realized it, I was in Brazil. So what I realized is when we try to meditate, and at a certain point we lose our object of meditation because we've gone somewhere else, it helps to do the opposite process, the inverted process, because if we do that more and more, that helps us develop more vigilance. And we start understanding the mechanisms the mechanisms of our mind that runs away. So how is it that I got from thinking about my cousin in Brazil? How did I get, from meditating to, a memory with my cousin in Brazil? Sometimes we're not even able. Sometimes halfway through we think, how did I get here? I have no idea. Okay, not all right. At that point, we let it go. We take a couple breaths and we try to meditate again. This process of doing the backward process helps us develop this so-called vigilance. And it should be present, but not too present, because when we're able to concentrate well, the vigilance can become a distraction itself if it's too present. So there's this kind of game between being vigilant but not too much. So knowing how to let go when we don't need it. But at the beginning we need a lot of vigilance. So we have these two. One is mindful recollection of the object of meditation. And I stay connected with my object of meditation, my breath, or the preciousness of this life, or whatever it is. And as I maintain that link with the object of meditation, there's a part of me that looks from afar and just to make sure, is checking to make sure that I'm following. I'm not going off road. The more I develop my vigilance, then the more I am able to manage the very subtle movements that take me away from my object of meditation. If one tries to meditate well and sees that every once in a while that the mind goes astray, don't worry, this is normal because we're not used to being present in the present moment. We're not used to staying still on our chosen object of meditation. And this is the process that we do for single-pointed meditation. When we sit down to meditate at the beginning, it's physically difficult. When we can sit down to meditate and it becomes physically pleasurable, it's when we've generated the flexibility of the body for meditation. At the beginning, it's very tiresome to keep the mind still. When keeping the mind still on the chosen object of meditation without mental torpor, without of mental agitation, if that brings an inner state of pleasure, it's actually pleasurable to stay in that state. That's when we develop the flexibility of the mind. When there's flexibility, that's both physical and mental in relation to an object of meditation, that's when we develop a calm abiding, shine, calm abiding. At the beginning, physically it's tiresome, and then it becomes physically pleasurable, and then mentally it requires more energy. It's a kind of fight, to stay still on the object of meditation. And little by little, this inner struggle becomes weaker and weaker. It becomes easier and easier until it becomes actually pleasurable to stay clearly on the object of meditation without mental fogginess or mental agitation. And that's when one has developed the state of meditative concentration called shine in Sanskrit, shamatha in Tibetan, translated as calm abiding. So now when we talk about meditative concentration, this is what we mean. You have a mental image now of what we're talking about? Okay. Because every once in a while I ask, have you understood? Have you understood? And I think, what have you understood? It's important. Ask and repeat, because these are very important concepts. And then once we have seen this, there are other steps, little by little, to follow. And let's remember that we need to start where we are. Here, we're in a state where our mind is used to be completely distracted. It's not used to staying still. It's used to jumping around. So it's normal at the beginning. It's tiresome, and we need time to gradually create the habit. And what's beautiful is when this habit is created, then one can keep his mind still, even when it's in movement, even when one needs to talk and interact in daily life. But the mind can be under control if one does something with awareness, without jumping from one thing to the other, without reacting. So I say the best meditation is it's said when one is no longer actually sitting and meditating. But let's set that aside. But let's say as a direction, as our objective, it's that. So when we want to start a meditation process, it's important between one session and another to do what we can to be aware. I'm walking, I'm eating. For example, I like observing it, when I take a shower, the water, it hits my head, and the difference in temperature from my head to my feet, or be somewhere and observe what's going on. We try to be present where we are, and this really helps our meditation. One helps the other. If we want to meditate well, we need to also put energy into being more present and more mindful when we are not actually sitting down to mindful, and also vigilant when we're not mindfuling, because even when we're not meditating, thoughts come to us and we think, okay, this thought has come, but I don't have to follow it. It's not beneficial to me. We let go of that. So the meditative state and the mindfulness in between sessions, one can generate more and more this habit. And then once we have developed and trained more in this tool, then we can choose specific meditation objects. And there's the Lam Rim, the graduated path towards enlightenment, these teachings that show us all the steps, very detailed steps, that show us what we should be meditating on, starting from where we are today all the way to Buddhahood. There's specific steps that we should familiarize our mind with to reach Buddhahood. But to do this, first of all, we need, before you get in, before you start your trip, you need to learn how to drive. So we have analytical meditation, we have single-pointed meditation, and then we have the Shargom, which is then the Shargam meditation is when we have steps in front of us. We say, I have to do this, and then I have to do this. It's like in the Guru Puja, for example, from verse 84 on. That's a meditation to look back on the steps of the path, the graduated path of. We can explain that another time. Now it's time for dedications and for lunch.
Drove Munsela takto ne gyurchi kewa kuntu yanda lamadang dralme cheki pela longche chin sadan lamge yunten rabzone dorje change kopa nyurtoba sho nimo dele tsendele nime kuyan dele kshin Ninsen takto delek pe koncho sumki chingi lob koncho sumki ngodrubot sol koncho sumki trashishu.
At dawn or at dusk, at night or midday, may the three jewels grant us their blessings. May they help us to achieve all realizations and sprinkle the path of our lives with various signs of auspiciousness.
Buon appetito e riprendiamo quindi come da programma alle 3:30. Ok? Grazie a tutti.